Good evening. We are live. Yes, indeed. Right on time, too, right on the nose. I thought I was going to end up being late this evening, but no, I'm on time. Yay, me. Okay, so I need to just bear with me a second while oops. Hold on. I know you're seeing weird stuff, but that's all right. All right. There we go. I wanted to get my height a little better here, better positioned. Okay, so how was everybody this evening? Good, I hope. All right, Miss Perfectionist, I apologize. There we go. Okay, we'll leave it at that. All right, so welcome to the Nancy Drew Mystery Story Hour. Nancy Drew is a series of girl detective stories, um, and they were written by an author by the name of Carolyn Keene. And she wrote a huge series of Nancy Drew books. She had some others as well. Another similar set called The Dana Girls. They were interesting. Those books were mysteries that revolved around actual historical events in history. So it's kind of an interesting mix. Maybe we'll read one of those one time. We'll see. But anyway, just let me take care of the housekeeping real quick here. My name is Sharon Schultz, and I am known as the Bay Lady. I do virtual tours, and I live in the Chesapeake Bay area, so hence the Bay Lady. But it's a beautiful region of the world to live in, and there are many interesting, unusual, and beautiful things to do here. And I love road trips, and I don't mind sharing. So um, that's how I got started, and that's why I'm the Bay Lady, because I do a lot of tours around the Bay. But anyway, I also have other little things that I do. I teach crafts at sometimes every now and then I'll do a craft video, craft tour, and they're live streams, so you can ask questions and participate and stuff, which I like a lot. I think that's really fine. Um, the other thing is that all of my tours are tip based. They're based on tips that I get for my content, and that usually keeps the content flowing. um, sometimes it's helpful to have a little gas money, a little pocket money to buy new Nancy Drew books, that I can reach you, what have you. Anyway, the way to support my content is through a platform that's called Buy Me a Coffee. Okay. And if you wanted to buy me a coffee, you'll find the link on my Facebook page and on my YouTube channel. But basically, it's buymeacoffee.com backslash Anamcara 50X. Anamcara 50X. That's ANAM, Anam, CARA 50X marks the spot. Okay, so this is where we are. This is the secret of the old clock. This was number one, the first in a long line of Nancy Drew mystery series. So this was the first one. and it was written in 1930. So Nancy Drew is a smart girl, and she's going to solve her mysteries without aid from internet, cell phone, Google. None. Didn't exist. 1930, folks. She barely had a telephone. Okay. So this is just good old fashioned detective work. What's interesting in some of these books, when they were written in 1930, a lot of the terminology used has changed now. Back then, it was more to the point, matter of fact, where today a lot of terminology has changed for fear of, you know, insulting someone, making somebody feel, bad or what have you. So, um, what's in here is in here, and I haven't read this in years. So, um, you take it with a grain of salt. 1930, 1930. Okay. We've read the first 6 chapters. Um, and we've been averaging 3 chapters a night, an hour, or whatever. And if you're just catching up, you can find the first 2 live streams on Facebook Live and on my YouTube page as well. So you can go back and not miss the story. But we've been averaging, it seems to work out to be 3 chapters an hour. So tonight we're starting with chapter 7, and just a brief summary of where we've been so far. Nancy is trying to help some friends find a will that they believe would help them to better financial status and make going to school, specialized school available for one of her friends, etc. So there's a will missing, and they are trying to find it. And here we go. This is chapter 7, The Angry Dog. With the instinct of a detective who dared not miss a clue, Nancy deliberately moved closer to the bench on which the Topham girls were seated. If there should be another will, I'm afraid we'd be out of luck. The words in Ada's nasal voice came clearly to Nancy. Isabel's reply was so low in tone that the young sleuth could just manage to catch the words. Well, I, for one, don't believe Josiah Crowley ever made a later will. She gave a low laugh. Mother watched him like a hawk. Or thought she did, Isabel retorted. The old man got out of her clutches several times, don't forget. Yes, and what's worse, I'm sure Nancy Drew thinks he made a later will. That's why she's taken such an interest in those Hoover girls. I actually saw them go into Mr. Drew's office yesterday, and it wasn't to deliver eggs. If Nancy gets her father interested, he might dig up another will. Oh, how I hate that interfering girl. At this, Nancy could barely refrain from laughing. So the Tophams were concerned about the existence of a second will. With bated breath, she listened further. You're such a worrywart, Ada. You can trust Dad and Mom to take care of things no matter what happens, Isabel commented dryly. They won't let that pile of money get away from us. It's ours by right, anyhow. You've got something there, Ada conceded. We should have old Josiah's money after supporting and putting up with him for 3 years. That was pretty clever of Mother, never accepting any board money from Josiah. The conversation ended as Isabel and Ada rose from the bench and walked away. Nancy waited until they were out of sight. Then she emerged from her hiding place, seating herself on the bench vacated by the Topham sisters. Nancy mulled over the remarks she had just overheard. There's no doubt in my mind now that there's no doubt in my mind now that if there is a later will, the Tophams haven't destroyed it. How thrilling! But where can it be? Nancy realized that to find it was a real challenge, and I'd better hurry up before the Tophams stumble on it. For another 10 minutes, Nancy sat lost in thought, shifting all the facts she had gleaned so far. There must be some clue I've overlooked, she told herself. Then suddenly, with a cry of delight, she sprang to her feet. Why didn't I think of that before? The Hoover girls and the Turners aren't the only ones who should have figured in this will. There are other relatives of Mr. Crowley who have filed a claim. I wonder who they are. If I could only talk with them, I might pick up a clue. Immediately, Nancy set off for her father's office. He was engaged in an important conference when she arrived. So she had to wait 10 minutes before being admitted to the inner office. Now what? Mr. Drew asked, smiling, as she burst in upon him. Have you solved the mystery, or is your purse in need of a little change? Nancy's cheeks were flushed and her eyes danced with excitement. Don't tease me, she protested. I need some information. At your service, Nancy. The young sleuth poured out the story of the Topham sisters' conversation in the park and told him of her own conclusions. Mr. Drew listened with interest until she had finished. Excellent deducting, he praised his daughter. I'm afraid, though, I can't help you obtain the relatives' names. I don't know any of them. Nancy looked disappointed. How dear, she sighed. And I'm so anxious to find out right away. If I delay even a single day, the Tophams may locate the other well and destroy it. The next instant, her face brightened. I know. I'll drive out and see the Turner sisters. They might be able to tell me who the other relatives are. Nancy rose and headed for the door. Just a minute, said the lawyer. I wonder if you realize just what you're getting into, Nancy. What do you mean? Only this. Detective work isn't always the safest occupation in which to engage. I happen to know that Richard Topman is an unpleasant man when crossed. If you do find out anything which may frustrate him, the entire Topman family could make things extremely difficult for you. I'm not afraid of them, Dad. Hang on 1 second, folks. Excuse me. I always find hot tea to be soothing for the throat. Okay, here we go. Da, 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 da. I'm not afraid of them, Dad. Good, Mr. Drew exclaimed. I was hoping you would say that. I'm glad you have the courage of your convictions, but I didn't want you to march off into battle without a knowledge of what you might be up against. Battle? Yes. The Toppins won't give up the fortune without a bitter struggle. However, if they attempt to make serious trouble, I promise to deal with them myself. And if I do find the will, Dad, I'll take the matter into court. Oh, thank you. There's no one like you in all the world. After leaving her father's office, Nancy went directly home to get her car. When she told Hannah her plans, the housekeeper warned, don't become too deeply involved in this matter, dear. In your zeal to help other people, you may forget to be on your guard. I promise to be as careful as a pussycat walking up a slippery roof, Nancy assured the housekeeper with a grin, and left the house. Quickly backing her car from the garage, she set off in the direction of the Turner home. The miles seemed to melt away as Nancy's thought raced from one idea to another. Before the young sleuth knew it, she'd reached home. Hi, Judy, she reached the house. Sorry. Hi, Judy, she called to the little girl who was playing in the yard with a midget badminton set. The child looked very cunning in a pink playsuit. The hand embroidered teddy bears on it were surely the work of her loving aunts. Hi, Nancy. I'm glad you came. Now I'll have somebody to play with, Judy said, running up to the visitor. Obligingly, Nancy took a racket and battered the feathered shuttlecock towards the child. Hit the birdie, she called. Judy missed, but picked up the shuttlecock and whammed it nicely across the net. Nancy hit it back, and this time the little girl caught the birdie on her racket and sent it over. The game went on for several minutes, with Judy crying out in delight. You're the bestest batter I ever played with, Nancy, she declared. After 10 more minutes of play, Nancy said, let's go into the house now, Judy. I want to talk to your aunties. Judy skipped ahead and announced her new playmate's arrival. Hello, Nancy, the woman said as she entered the living room. We were watching the game from the window, said Mary Turner. This is a real thrill for Judy. Edna and I are very poor at hitting the birdie. It was a lot of fun, Nancy replied. I'm glad to see you all again. She now asked whether the police had located the thieves who had taken the silver heirlooms from the house. Not yet, Mary said. And what's worse, we found that several other pieces had been taken too. What a shame, Nancy exclaimed. But I'm sure the stolen articles will be found. Then she added, I came here on a particular mission. Yes. Your story about Mr. Joshua Crowley intrigued me. Then the other day I met two girls, Grace and Allison Hoover, who told me of a similar promise from him regarding his will. How amazing, Edna Turner exclaimed. I heard Josiah mention the Hoovers and Allison's beautiful voice. Dad and I have become very much interested in the case and are inclined to agree with you and the Hoovers that Mr. Crowley may have written another will shortly before his death and hidden it someplace. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if such a will could be found? Mary exclaimed. It might mean all the difference in the world so Judy to Judy's future. What I want to do, Nancy went on, is talk to as many of Mr. Crowley's relatives that I can find. Someplace I may pick up a clue to where a more recent will is hidden. Tell me, do any of his other relatives live around here? Yes, three that I can think of, Edna answered. She went on to say that two cousins who had never married lived on a farm just outside Titusville. Their names are Fred and William Matthews. Suddenly, the Turner sisters blushed a deep pink. They glanced at each other, then back at Nancy. Finally, Edna said, many years ago, Fred proposed to Mary and William to me, and we came near accepting. But just at that time, we had the great tragedy in the family and took Judy's mother to rear, so we decided not to marry. An embarrassing pause was broken by Judy. Someday my aunties are going to give me one of my mother's dollies, Nancy. Isn't that nice? It certainly is, Nancy agreed, and you must be sure to show it to me. Then she asked the sisters, what relation are the Matthews to Mr. Crowley? First cousins on his mother's side. Do you think they would mind my asking them some questions, even though I'm a stranger? Not at all. They're very fine gentlemen. And tell them Mary and I sent you, Edna added. How far is Titusville from here? Nancy inquired. Oh, not more than 5 miles on Route 10A. You could drive there in a few minutes. It's on the way to Masonville. Nancy, won't you stay and have lunch with us? Eager to continue her work, the young sleuth was about to refuse, but Judy put in an invitation also. Please, oh please, Nancy. And while my aunties are fixing it, you and I can play badminton. All right, Nancy agreed, and thank you very much. It was nearly 2 o'clock when she finally was ready to depart. Oh, Mary, said Edna suddenly, we forgot to tell Nancy about Josiah's wife's cousin, Mrs. Rowan. Mrs. Abby Rowan. She'd be apt to know more about the will than anyone else. That's right. You should really call on her, Nancy. She took care of Josiah one time when he was sick, and he thought the world of her. He often declared he intended to leave her something. She's a widow and has very little. Even a few $1,000s would mean a lot to her, Edna said. Abby must be over 80 years of age and growing forgetful. She has no children and there is no one to look after her. Exactly where shall I find Mrs. Rowan? Nancy asked, hoping it wasn't too far away. Abby lives on the West Lake Road, Edna responded. It's a good many miles from here. Then I shan't have the time to go there tomorrow, the young Cluth said. But I'll surely see her as soon as I can. And now I must be going. Nancy thanked the Turner sisters and said goodbye. But before she could leave, Judy insisted on showing how she could jump rope and do all kinds of dancing steps with a hoop on the lawn. Judy entertains us all the time, Mary remarked. We believe she's very talented. Nancy thought so too. As she drove off, she again hoped that the money would become available for a very special education for Judy. After Nancy had gone 5 miles along the designated route, the she began to watch the mailboxes. Soon she noted one which bore the name Matthews. The farmhouse stood back a distance from the road, and it had a wide sweep of lawn in front of it. Near the house, a man was riding a small tractor, moving the grass. Nancy drove down the narrow lane which led into the grounds and stopped opposite the spot where the man was working. The man's back was toward her, and he apparently had not heard the car above the roar and the name of the the man. Shoot. I lost my place. Sorry about that. All right, try this again. Near the house, a man was riding a small tractor mowing the grass. Nancy drove down the narrow lane which led to the grounds and stopped opposite the spot where the man was working. The man's back was toward her, and he apparently had not heard the car above the noise of the tractor. So she waited. Looking toward the house, Nancy suddenly saw a sight that appalled her. Wedged between two stones of a broken wall was a police dog puppy whining pitifully. Nancy dashed forward and released the little animal. As it continued to whimper, she cuddled the pup in her arms and began to examine its paws. Why, you poor thing, Nancy said, seeing a tear in the flesh of one hind leg. A tear in the flesh of one hind leg. This must be taken care of right away. She decided to carry the puppy over to the man on the mower. As Nancy walked across the lane, she suddenly heard an angry growl near her. Looking back, she saw a huge police dog, evidently the pup's mother, bounding towards her. It's all right, Nancy called soothingly to the dog. I'm not going to take your baby away. She took 2 more strides but got no further. With a fierce snarl, the dog leapt on Nancy, knocking her flat. Tea is so good. Chapter 8, A Forgotten Secret. Nancy screamed for help, hoping to attract the farmer's attention. She expected momentarily to be bitten by the angry dog, but to her great relief, the animal didn't harm her. The young sleuth's sudden fall had caused the puppy to fly from her arms. With a leap, its mother was at the pup's side. She grabbed her baby by the back of its neck and trotted off toward the barn. Oh, that was a narrow escape. Nancy took a deep breath as she got to her feet, brushed herself off, and ruefully surveyed a tear in her sweater. By this time, the man on the tractor, having changed direction, saw the fracas and came running. He apologized for the dog's actions, but Nancy said quickly, "It was my fault. I should have set the pup down. Its mother probably thought I was trying to dog nap her baby." Possibly. Nancy explained why she had picked up the little animal, and the farmer said he would look at the cut later. "I'm glad you weren't hurt," he added. "Thanks for being such a good scout about it. Did you come to see me or my brother?" he asked. "I'm Fred Matthews." Nancy gave her name and added that she was acquainted with the Turner sisters and others who had been told they would benefit under Joshua Crawley's will. "My dad, the lawyer Carson Drew, and I are working on the case. We believe there might be a later will that later than the one presented by Mr. Topsail, and we'd like to find it. And you came to see if William and I could give you a clue." Fred's bright eyes sparkled boyishly. "Well, that's right, Mr. Matthews. Also, did Mr. Crowley ever ask you who he was going to leave you some money?" "Indeed, he did." At this moment, another woman came out from the house. Fred introduced him as his brother William. Both were tall, spare, and strong muscled. Though their hair was gray, the men's faces were youthful and unwrinkled. "Let's all sit down under the tree here and discuss this," Fred said, leading the way to a group of rustic chairs. He told William of Nancy's request, then asked, "Did cousin Josiah ever give you any idea where he'd made a will in which we were not beneficiaries?" "No, I thought one would come to light when he died. To tell the truth, Miss Drew, Fred and I were thunderstruck at the will which left everything to the Tophams." That wasn't what that wasn't what cousin Josiah led us to believe." "It certainly wasn't," Fred spoke up. "But I guess William and I counted our chickens before they were hatched. We just about make ends meet here with all our small fruit farm. Help and equipment cost a lot of money. And one thing that we've always wanted to do but couldn't afford was to travel. We thought we'd use the money from cousin Josiah to do that." "But our dream bubble burst," said William. "No trips for us." Nancy smiled. "You don't have to give up hope yet. Dad and I haven't." She was so disappointed that the brothers could offer her no clue about a place to look for another well. A little while later, she left the farm and returned home. N- no new evidence, she told her father. Let's hope Mrs. Abby Rowan has some. Early the next morning, she set off for the elderly woman's house and reached her destination by asking directions of people living along Westlake Road. This must be Abby Rowan's house, Nancy told herself. It's in the description. She climbed out of the seat. She climbed out of the car and stood before the one-story frame building, which was badly in need of paint and repair. The yard around it was overgrown with weeds, and the picket fence enclosing the cottage sagged dejectedly. The place looks deserted, Nancy mused, but I'll see if Mr. Rowan's secretary is at home. Nancy then made her way up the scraggly path to the house and rapped on the front door. There was no response. After a moment, she knocked again. This time, a muffled voice said, "Who's there? If you're a peddler, I don't want anything." "I'm not selling anything," Nancy called out reassuringly. "Won't you let me in, please?" There was a long silence, and then the quavering voice replied, "I can't open the door. I've hurt myself and can't walk." Nancy hesitated an instant before pushing open the door. As she suspected, into the dreary living room, she saw a tall, frail figure on the couch. Abby Rowan lay huddled under an old shawl with her withered face drawn with in pain. "I am Nancy Drew, and I've come to help you, Miss Rowan." The old lady turned her head and regarded Nancy with a stare of wonder. "If you've come to help me," she repeated unbelievably. "I didn't think anyone would ever bother about the old Abbey again. Here, let me arrange the pillows for you." Gently, Nancy moved the old woman into a more comfortable position. "Yesterday I fell down the stairs," Mrs. Rowan explained. "I hurt my hip and sprained my ankle." "Haven't you had a doctor?" Nancy asked in astonishment. "No," Abby Rowan sighed. "Not a soul has been here, and I couldn't get in touch with anybody. I have no telephone." "Can you walk at all?" Nancy asked. "A little." "Then your hip isn't broken," Nancy said in relief. "Let me see your ankle." "Oh my, it is swollen. I'll have a bandage for you." "There's a clean cloth in the closet in the kitchen," Abby told her, "and I haven't any regular bandage." "You really should have a doctor," Nancy remarked. Let, let me drive you to one." "I can't afford it," the woman murmured. "My pension check hasn't come, and it's too small anyway." Take another sip of tea here. Okay, let's see what time we have going on. Oh, we're good. Okay. Moving right along. "Let me pay the doctor," Nancy offered. Abby Rowan shook her head stubbornly. I'll not take charity. I'd rather die first. Well, if you insist upon not having a doctor, I'm going to the nearest drugstore and get some bandaging and a few other things, Nancy told her. Before you go, I'll make you a cup of tea. There's no tea in the house. Then I'll get a box. What else do you need? I need most everything, but I can't afford anything right now. You may get me some tea and a loaf of bread. That's enough. You'll find the money in a jar in the cupboard. It's not very much, but it's all I'll have. I'll be back in a few minutes, Nancy promised. She stopped in the kitchens long enough to examine the cupboards, with the exception of a little flour and sugar and a can of soup. There appeared to be nothing in the house to eat. Nancy found that the money jar contained less than 5 cents. I'll not take any of it, she decided. Quietly, the young sleuth slipped out the back door. She drove quickly to the nearest town and ordered a stock of groceries. Then she stopped at a drugstore and purchased bandages and liniment. Reaching the cottage, she carried the supplies inside and deftly set about making Abby's more comfortable. She bathed the swollen ankle and bound it neatly with the antiseptic bandage. It feels better already, Mrs. Rowan told her gratefully. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come. Oh, someone would have dropped in. You'd probably end up spending time with the lady with the Christmas candy, the Christmas ornament tree. She went to the kitchen and in a short while prepared tea and a light brunch for Mary, a light brunch for the elderly woman. As Abby Rowan ate the nourishing meal, Nancy was gratified to observe that almost immediately her patient became more cheerful and seemed to gain strength. She sat up on the couch and appeared eager to talk with Nancy. There aren't many folks willing to come in and help an old lady. If Joshua Crowley had lived, things would have been different, she declared. I could have paid someone to watch over me so I could look after you. It was a nourishing meal. Nancy was gratified to observe that almost immediately her patient became more cheerful and seemed to gather strength. There aren't many folks willing to come help an old lady. I could have paid someone to look after me. It's strange that he didn't provide for you in his will, Nancy replied quietly. She did not wish to excite the woman by telling her real mission. Yet Nancy hoped that she might lead her tactfully into a discussion of Josiah Crowley's affairs without raising hopes which may never be realized. It's my opinion that Joshua did provide for me, Mrs. Rowan returned empathetically. Many a time he said to me, Abby, you'll never need to worry. When I'm gone, you'll be well taken care of by my will. And then everything was left to the Tophams. Nancy encouraged her to proceed. That was according to the first will, Abby Rowan stated. You mean there was another will? Nancy inquired eagerly. Why, I saw that will with my own eyes. You saw it? Nancy gasped. The old woman nodded gravely. Mind, I didn't see what was in the will. One day, Joseph came to call me and give me some money. Right off, I noticed he had a bunch of papers in his hand. Abby, he said, I've made a new will. I didn't bother with a lawyer, I just wrote it myself. How long ago was that? Nancy asked quickly. Let me see. Abby Rowan frowned thoughtfully. I can't remember the exact date. It was this past spring. Anyway, Josiah hinted that he'd done well by me. But Josiah, I said, are you sure it's legal to write it yourself? Of course it is, said the young lawyer. I was told it was all right, just so long as I wrote in it myself and signed it. But I did have it witnessed. Do you know who witnessed the will? Nancy broke in. No, he didn't say. Haven't you any idea of what will become of the will now? Nancy asked hopefully. Well, I remember Josiah did something about putting it where nobody could get it unless they had legal authority to do so. But I don't really know what became of it. Are you certain that was all Mr. Crowley said? Henry inquired gently. She recalled the Turners saying that Abby had become forgetful. The elderly woman shook her head and sighed. Many a night I've lain awake, trying to think what else did he say about where he might have put the will. I just can't recollect. Try to remember, Nancy begged. I can't, Abby Rowan murmured hopelessly. I've tried and tried. She leaned against the curtains and closed her eyes, as though the effort had exhausted her. At that very moment, the clock on the mantel chimed 12. Abby's eyes fluttered open, and an odd experience passed over her face. For an instant, she stared straight before her, then slowly turned her head and fastened her eyes on the clock. Let's see here. Okay. All right. This is chapter 8. Or, sorry, 9. Okay. Chapter 9. Helpful disclosures. Nancy watched Abby Rowan intently as the mantel clock finished striking. The elderly woman's lips had begun to move. The clock, she whispered. That was it. The clock. Nancy gripped the arm of her chair in excitement. Josiah Crowley hit the will in a clock, she prompted. No, it wasn't that, Abby murmured, sighing again. I know Josiah said something about a clock, but whatever it was has slipped my mind. Silence descended upon the room. Nancy was wondering what connection the fireplace could have with the missing will. Mrs. Cumberland was staring at her clock, evidently still trying to probe her memory. Suddenly, she gave a low cry. There! It came to me just like that. What, Mrs. Rowan? Nancy urged quietly, lest she startle the old woman into forgetfulness. A notebook, Abby exclaimed triumphantly. Nancy's heart gave a leap, but she forced herself to say calmly, please tell me more about this notebook. Well, one day, not long before he passed away, Josiah said to me, Abby, after I'm dead, if my last will isn't found, you can learn about it in this little book of mine. Do you know what became of the notebook, Mrs. Rowan? Oh, dearie me, there goes my memory again. No, I don't own. Although baffled, Nancy felt like a growing conviction that the warehouses of the Crawleys would definitely be tied up with a clock of some kind. Brett, she pondered, why did the striking of the mantel clock remind Abby of the notebook? Impulsively, Abby got up and went over to the mantel. She looked inside the glass front and in the back. There were no papers inside. Returning to her chair, Nancy asked the elderly woman what becomes of the building when he gives it up. The Toppins get it most likely. They probably get everything. There must have been a family clock, Nancy mused, half to herself. A family clock, Abby repeated. Oh, yes, there was a clock. Okay, we are going to leave off there for now. Come back next Sunday evening at 9 o'clock, and we will read another installment of The Secret of the Old Clock by Carolyn Keene. All right, well, Sunday night, work week begins tomorrow. Roads get crowded in the morning as everybody goes off to their daily routines. So make it a good one.